So imagine yourself back in the 1800s, mid 1800s, and you have all this important data. And this important data shows how many of the soldiers in your country are dying, but not dying because of battle wounds, dying because they got sick in the hospital where they were supposed to be getting better and been passed on for preventable reasons. So things like cholera that you get from unsanitary conditions and unsanitary water. So this is important stuff to you, and you want to convince the powers that be, these generals, that, hey, they got to do something different. And you compile this 800-page report. Now, can you imagine somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, here's all these statistics. Take a look at all these tables, make sense out of them, and institute some changes. That's a tough sell. It's an even tougher sell if you're a woman. And that was the case back in the 1800s. We get all this data, and it was compiled initially in forms of these tables. And these would be mind-numbing. Can you imagine 800 pages of stuff like this that has tons of these tables? As a general, you're not going to digest this stuff and go, oh, okay, yeah, let's make some changes. I don't think you're going to be very agreeable to that. So what are you going to have to do then? Well, what we're going to have to do with our data is you're going to have to summarize that data. You're going to have to put it in some kind of a digestible form so that it has meaning and impact, something that'll help you make a change. So there's a few forms that we're going to go through, some graphs that are very helpful and that enlighten. And we're also going to take time to show you some graphs that are not necessarily intentionally deceptive, but maybe misleading. And we'll start with a frequency polygon. And a frequency polygon is really just going to take the place of a frequency histogram. Now, last week we learned about frequency histograms, and here's one for the best actors and actresses, actually best actresses. What you're going to do in constructing a frequency histogram, this can be a frequency polygon, is instead of these bars, you're going to take and put dots at these midpoints. And then just simply connect the dots with this data so that you're replacing the bars with points on a graph, and you get a frequency polygon as opposed to a frequency histogram. It's the same kind of thing, and it's still displaying the same information. It's just doing so in a different way. Now, if you want to try and dramatize this data and show it in a little bit clearer form, hey, that's great. Now, let's go back to the example that started out this lecture, and that was with these data tables. These data tables were the product of Florence Nightingale. And Florence Nightingale was probably best remembered as a nursing pioneer. Even though she came from a wealthy English family, she insisted on becoming a nurse against her family's wishes. And when the Crimean War broke out, Crimean War was between Russia and Turkey, but France and England got involved as well. When the Crimean War broke out, she took a team of nurses to the Crimean region to help out with the soldiers there, and she saw some deplorable conditions in terms of sanitization, health, water, bed linens. I mean, it was just appalling. But she was really, really good at keeping track of data. And she came up with this graph that I'm going to show you here. And this graph literally changed the face of healthcare for not only people in England, but for soldiers in the United States during our Civil War. And, you know, I'll let you take a look at this graph. Each of these wedges represents 1 month during the year. And you can see three different types of causes of deaths: wounds, preventable disease, and other causes. So what jumps out at you in terms of what's going on with this data? I mean, this is summarizing an awful lot of data in a very nice, neat way. So does anything strike you about this graph?
Like the shape of it?
The shape of it? But what's it telling you though? What's the meaning behind it? What big conclusion is inescapable?
It's showing that preventable disease is the biggest cause of death.
Yeah, by far. These are soldiers fighting a war, and yet they're dying of cholera and other things that can be prevented. She calculated that if the English army were subject to this, that the English army would be wiped out in a couple of years because there's just so much preventable death here. And she finally convinced people to make some big changes, to get adequate bandages, to get, I mean, they literally had a stream running through the barracks with just some really dirty, polluted water. So they made a lot of changes to improve the sanitization and the health of the soldiers. And you can see by later in the war, she started out with conditions in which there was like a 42% of deaths were from preventable disease. And she got that down to 2% by the end of the war. I mean, it was just astounding. And she had to fight really hard to make some changes, especially coming from a woman, you know, fighting against generals. I mean, it's astounding that she prevailed, but she did. But this was her graph. This graph was reproduced, you know, in, you know, countless places worldwide to show the efficacy of, you know, of good care in hospitals and sanitization. So even though she's remembered for being a nursing pioneer, she should also be really remembered for her work in statistics, because it was statistics that helped her convince people of better approach to healthcare. All right, so there's a quick little history lesson. If you're curious about Florence Nightingale at all, I think I've got a, is it here? Yeah, this link here that I'll put in the chat shows you a little bit about Florence Nightingale. It's a really amazing figure. Okay, so let's go back though and talk about other ways you can present data. Now, one of the ways you can present data, not prevent data. I don't think there's any way we can prevent data. We're really good at creating data as humans. But if you've got categorical data, that is data that's basically names, that kind of data, and you arrange your frequency histogram from most frequent to least frequent, then that particular type of arrangement is called a Pareto chart. And it's kind of a nice way to look at your data and allow comparisons, allow quick comparisons, because it's nice and organized. Now let me put that in the context of something a little bit more recent. Amongst all the turmoil of the last year with the pandemic and the elections, one of the things that was lost is just what a devastating year it was in terms of forest fires out in California. So it's giving me issues with scrolling again. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but there we go. So this is a Pareto chart, although it's done sideways, done different than the one up above, but this is a Pareto chart for the 20 biggest California wildfires. And what's nice is that it's not only is it in order, but these give you an idea of the magnitude. And if you look at the top 7 of these things, top 7 of these fires, 5 out of those 7 of them were in 2020. Wow. I'm so glad that 2020 is behind us. And this is a huge fire. 836,871 acres. Let's just do a quick calculation. 836, 871. That's 1,300 square miles. That's huge. It's like taking a 36 by 36 mile swath and just burning it down. Wow. But in any case, the point that I'm trying to get at is that, it's a nice way to represent data, but there's other ways to represent data as well. There's a lot of creative ways. So let's take a look at some of the more creative ways. And one of them I saw in association with these California wildfires, there's a couple of them. This one's pretty nice because it shows you where the most frequent fires are geographically, and it gives you numbers in terms of the intensity here. So from lightest to darkest, here it is on a statewide level that is throughout the lower 48. So again, pretty nice. And it's just a nice application of a display of data. But the one that I really, really liked was this one down here. Now this one's a couple years old, but what it shows you is a lot of things. It shows you the fires, when they occurred throughout the season. So that's listed horizontally. And then it shows you the year. It shows you the size of the particular fire. That's proportional to the height of the flames and the intensity of the flames. It also shows you the duration. So there's just a wealth of information crammed into this graph. And the other nice thing about that is you can see trends in terms of time. So as time goes on, you can see if there's any trends. Now for me, I can see a couple things that catch my attention, but does anything catch your attention?
All the big fires are clumped in the summer months.
All right, the big fires are clumped in the summer months, sure. August, September, October, which, in Michigan we don't think of as a summer month, but California is a little different. So yeah, good observation. Anything else? Anyone else spotting something that catches your eye? Well, a couple things that catch my attention would be that these really big fires seem to be happening more and more as time goes on. Certainly it looks like in 2017 that the fire season went a little bit later than usual, but it seems like there's more intense fires and a longer fire season as time goes on. In fact, that's what they were complaining about this year, is that the fire season pretty much went the whole year. So there's tons of different nifty ways that you can depict data. So comments or any further thoughts on this one? Now the traditional methods that we choose, are pretty nice, and they're basic. You don't always have to have the most exciting graph in the world to depict data. And Florence Nightingale did fine with some of these graphs, just showing the difference between what's experienced by Englishmen and English soldiers. Englishmen is in the black bar, and English soldiers is in the orange bar. So you can see some striking differences as to different causes of death for different age groups. So again, simple but effective. And those visual things, there's a big part of us that are attuned to our visual cues. We're not really built to assimilate tons of data. All right. Let me do one last infographic, and this is another historical one. And this one shows Napoleon's march on Moscow. Of course, that was back in 1812, 1813. But again, it succeeds in showing a lot of data all in one spot. So one of the things you had was the width of this line represented the size of his army. And right away, you can kind of follow the width of that line as he marched through Lithuania and Belarus and into Moscow. Meanwhile, the Russian army keeps falling back. What's happening to the width of this line?
It's getting thinner.
It's getting way thinner. Yeah, I would not want to be one of the people in this army. Not at all. They were wearing summer clothes, attacking in the winter. On the bottom, you can see the temperatures that they were facing. You can see where they were. What else? And by the time you get back, you see that the once grand army of 400,000 plus men have been reduced to like 10 or 15,000. Just disastrous. But there's just so much information conveyed in this one graph. It's really, really wonderful. So what I want you to do is keep an eye out for something that you think represents a good graph, something that interests you, that you think depicts a lot of data in a novel way. There's so many creative ways to represent data. So keep an eye out for something like that. We're also going to keep an eye out for things that are misleading. Maybe not intentionally, but yet they are a little bit misleading. So what do I mean by that? Well, I don't have to go much farther than my own experience. In fact, let me pull up a graph from just last week. And here we go. This one. So I use this app called Zwift to keep track of my biking and to help me with my workouts. And apparently when I get to 19,000, I'll get to the next award level. So great. All right, what's that going to give me? I don't know. We'll find out. But it looks like I got a pretty long way to go, doesn't it? I mean, look at that. I'm not anywhere close. But there's a problem with this graphic. Let me see if I can't illustrate it for you this way. And that's not the one that I want. Let me try and find that again. No, not here either. 0 for 2. All right, if I don't get in on this one, but I did. All right, so we did find our way here. And this is the one I want. So here's that same graphic again. I put it in Desmos. Now, thing is, I want to go from here to here. That's when I get my reward. Well, unfortunately, this isn't accurate depiction of how far I've gone and how far I got to go. Let me shut it off and make an adjustment here. Oops. Right here and here. So this is 0 to 19,000. Eventually, I've got to get to 19,000. But if you looked at where I was at 16,000. So it was actually not that far. But the graphic seemed to depict me as being pretty far away. And why is that? The reason that's so is because the graphic has me starting at 16,000. It doesn't start at 0. And that's a problem because it accentuates that difference. Now you can see that in other places as well. So let me see if I can't find that in our book here. Right here. Let's take a look at the difference between the nausea experienced by people who are testing OxyContin and those given a placebo. You remember, placebo is kind of like just a sugar pill. It's not going to have any clinical effect. Now, on the one hand, you've got this huge proportion of people who are affected with OxyContin or with nausea, but from OxyContin, and a tiny portion that got it from the placebo. But what's misleading about this?
The space between the percentages on the vertical axis?
Yeah, it's misleading because it doesn't start at 0. It starts at 10%. If it started at 0 and you took that same data, you take that same data, and all of a sudden, wow, that's, it's still a big difference. Certainly, OxyContin users experience nausea at a much higher rate, but it's not 10 or 15 times the rate like this first graphic implies. It's maybe twice the rate. So yeah, definitely a big difference, but not as dramatic of a difference. So starting at 0 is a big thing if you want to show things in their true relationship. Now, let's look down at this one here. To pick a graph of the number of smokers in 1970, we had 37% of adults smoke. In 2013, down to 18%. And it's represented by these two cigarettes. So if my math's any good, then I think that the first one should be twice as big as the second one. But is that how it's depicted? Does the first one look twice as big as the second one?
More like 4 times.
Yeah, thanks, Don. It looks more like 4 times as big. So why is that? Well, let me share a little link with you real quick, and we can kind of do that on our own, double check that. And let me just say that here. I'll drop the link in the chat. So you can play along if you like. If not, it's not a big deal. But you should be seeing something like this. And suppose you're using this area to represent, the proportion of smokers in 2013. And you know that comparing it to 1970, that the rate in 1970 is roughly double of what it is. So you can take this slider and slide it to the right and double it. But the problem is they doubled things in both dimensions. They doubled the width and they doubled the length. So if I double the width, which I already did, and I double the height up there, how does this new shaded area compare to what we started out with? How many times bigger is it now than what it was?
4.
Yeah, it's 4 times as big because you doubled 2 dimensions. The problem that you're running into with this is that we're trying to depict something that really represents 1 dimension. There's just 1 dimension here, but you're representing it with 2 dimensions. So unless you're really, really careful in drawing this, it's not going to come out the way you want it to. It looks like this first cigarette is 4 times as big as the second cigarette because they've doubled both dimensions. So there's a problem like that in your homework as well. Kind of even goes a little bit further. Let me see if I can't find it. No, but there's one in the homework that talks about, oh, this is the wrong section, that's why. That talks about something involving volumes. And the thing about volumes is that it's going to make this disparity between what you're trying to display and what you're actually displaying even worse. So let's take a quick look at it in this direction. Suppose you have some kind of a volume to represent how much oil a company or a country produces. And whatever it is, using that volume. Now, volume for some kind of a box is going to be length times width times height. And now you want to talk about some other country that maybe they're producing twice as much oil as you are. And you're like, okay, let me draw a new box. I'll draw that twice as long. twice the width, and twice the height. And if you rearrange this a little bit, that's 2 times 2 times 2, that's 8. And then L times W times H. So this new volume is going to be 8 times the old one. Well, that's not exactly the twice that you were gunning for. So the problem is you're using 3 dimensions, length, width, and height, to represent something that has just 1 dimension. It's just a number. So you got to be really careful when you're dealing with these kind of picture graphs to display some data. Okay. Comments or thoughts on that one? No, not that yet.
I actually do have a question.
Yeah,
Since
please.
that was referring to the size of the cigarettes, can you think of what value there would be in someone portraying it in that way?
You know, that's a great question. The only thing that comes to my mind is that they're trying to mislead you, really, to be honest. Yeah, I think you'd have to be really, really careful in adjusting the sizes so that one of them is twice as big as the other. I mean, to be really spot on accurate, if you made one side the square root of 2 bigger and the other side the square root of 2 bigger, then overall you could get figures that are twice as big as another one. But you'd have to be clever like that. So I'd make one side the square root of 2 times length and the other side the square root of 2 times the height. And then overall you get something that is twice as big. But yeah, outside of that, boy, I'm not sure. Yeah. It's just not a good choice, I don't think. I mean, I hope most people aren't trying to deceive, but you know, some of them are. I appreciate the question in another sense because it reminds me of something that we did last week. We're talking about frequency histograms. So let me go back to some of our data from last week. Now, here's our actresses and actors column of data. And we looked at this, we got some nice frequencies, etc. But one thing that people can do if they want to be sneaky is they can adjust the class width in clever ways, not just adjust it from say 10 to 20 or something like that, which is going to give a different look and feel to the data, but you could make these classes unequal in width. And if you did that, the only thing that I could think of is that you're really trying to mislead somebody, because outside of maybe the n classes, the one to the right and the one to the left, the rest of these should be the same width. So if you see something that goes maybe 18 and 19 and then 20 to 29 and then skip something, you know, 30 to 55, you know, some big chunk in the middle, you got to wonder about that. It's like, well, why are you coming up with these seemingly arbitrary class widths? Because they should be the same. So thanks so much for the question, Don. It did remind me of something else, like I said, that I wanted to mention. These classes should pretty much be the same width, with the possible exception of the n classes. So that'd be another way you could be a little bit deceptive in terms of your graph. Cool. Anything else on your mind here? All right. Let me see if I can't pull up another one that I don't think it's necessarily intentionally misleading, but it's kind of difficult to work with. So I'll let you think on this one for a second while I put up a poll here. Look at this graph and ask yourself, well, what proportion of these items here are represented by that wedge C? Let me see if I can't get up a poll for you real quick. Mhm. All right. Hoping that one stuck. We'll find out in a second here. Polls. There we go. Let me come back here to that one. So what percentage of this object do you think was represented by the wedge C? %, 11%, 14%, 18%. We can get a few more votes in, that'd be great. Right now, only 68% of you voted. Okay, looking a little bit better. Okay, so I'm not sure if Mimi's voting, but that's okay. I'm not voting. There's 29 attendees here. So that doesn't include me, and 86% of you voted. So let me end the polling and share the results. All right, so 5% was edged out as a winner, but let's take a look at this in a different way, because right now this is depicted with 3 dimensions. Let's see what it's going to look like if we kind of flatten it out. So let me close this. If we were to flatten this out, we'll take a look at it down below. There we go. So the winner was 11%. But it's kind of hard to tell when you've got that 3D object. You're trying to represent 3 dimensions, but you're stuck with 2 dimensions. It's not as easy to look at that. So again, not necessarily intentionally misleading, but just hard to interpret. So I would suggest you use better choices than that. Let's stick with the pie graph and take a look at a couple different recording artists. So suppose you produce the Arts, Beats, and Eats, and you're really kind of bummed because we couldn't have Arts, Beats, and Eats last year. You're hoping to have Arts, Beats, and Eats this year. So you're looking at number of downloads on iTunes for a couple different artists over the last 6 months and trying to decide, all right, well, which artist should I bring in? By the way, any suggestions for artists? Somebody we should think about? Who should I bring in as the event organizer? Nobody? Gotta have a favorite artist, right?
Odessa.
Who is it?
I said Odessa, but it's just because it's my favorite DJ.
Odessa? Like that? Yeah. And I need one more.
How about
You can,
Dead Mouse. And I think it's got the leet spelling there, if I remember right. Is that right, Sam?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So you've got these two artists that you're looking at, and you're trying to decide, well, which one do you want to bring in? Now you can do this pie chart, which shows you that maybe Dead Mouse has had more downloads over the last 6 months. But let's take a look at a different look at this data. And that'd be this one, this histogram. So it's the sales for January, February, March, April, May, and June. Now it's basically the same information, it's just breaking it out over 6 months. But this illustrates a little bit more than what we just saw. What other interesting piece of information would you want to consider, or which graph would you use? The first one, the pie graph, or the second one, the histogram?
The
I'd
second
want
one.
to,
Histogram.
Histogram, good. I agree with the histogram. What extra piece of information are you seeing that would help you decide which one to use?
Trend over time.
Ah, well done. Because we've broken this up across different months, you're seeing a trend over time. So our first artist is increasing his sales, and the second one, yeah, okay, it kind of tails off. So yeah, the trend over time is what you're looking for. So that's some more information that would certainly play into your decision as to who you would invite. So nice, nice. How are we looking with all those? All right,
Good.
good deal, good deal. I think that'll do it for me for this section. Yeah, so we should be in good shape. One of the things that I do want to cover, but I'll cover that in association with the next section, is copying data into a clipboard and then pasting it into StatDisk. When you see this little icon here, you can click that and click copy into clipboard, and that's going to help you get your data into StatDisk. So make sure you look for those things, because it's going to make your life so much easier when working on your homework. Awesome. Well, that'll do it for this section.